The black man had spent 5 years behind the checkout counter at Brooklyn Market, greeting customers with a smile, remembering their names, and showing kindness even when his paycheck barely covered his bills. He believed in doing the right thing, no matter what. So when an older man came up short at the register, the cashier didn't hesitate to cover the difference. But what he didn't know was that this man wasn't just another customer, he was the owner of it all. And that small act of kindness was about to change everything in his life. The city of Atlanta pulsed with energy, cars honking, streetlights flickering against the glassy surfaces of towering buildings, pedestrians moving with purpose. But just a few blocks away from the bustling downtown, nestled within a quieter neighborhood, sat a small grocery store called Brooklyn Market. It wasn't much a modest corner store with flickering neon signage and aisles packed tight with essentials, but to Darius Thompson, it was home. Darius had worked at Brooklyn Market for over 5 years. At 27, he had seen all kinds of people walk through those doors: mothers juggling groceries and toddlers, construction workers grabbing a quick bite after a long shift, elderly regulars who just needed someone to talk to. And Darius, he made sure every single one of them felt seen. It wasn't just about scanning barcodes and handing out receipts. It was about remembering Miss Lorraine's favorite brand of tea, about asking Mr. Phillips how his hip was healing after surgery, about noticing when someone looked like they were having a rough day. Standing behind the register, Darius ran a hand over his close-cropped hair and glanced toward the entrance as the bell jingled. A gust of crisp autumn air slipped through the doorway as a man hesitated on the threshold. He was wrapped in a worn-out jacket, his beanie pulled low, shoulders hunched like he was bracing himself against more than just the cold. Darius had seen that kind of hesitation before, the kind that meant someone wasn't sure if they really belonged. "Hey there," Darius called out, his voice easy, welcoming. "Chilly out tonight. Let me know if you need help finding anything." The man gave a small nod but didn't respond. Instead, he stepped inside, his movements cautious, like he was trying not to draw attention. Darius watched as he wandered the aisles, his eyes flickering over price tags, fingers lingering over the cheaper brands. He finally settled on a loaf of bread, a small carton of milk, and a protein bar, the kind of purchase that wasn't for a full meal but just enough to get by. When the man approached the counter, Darius noticed his hands were trembling as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, some loose change, and set it on the counter with a quiet sigh. Darius did the math in his head before even scanning the items. He was short. The man swallowed hard, looking down at the protein bar. "I'll just put this one back." Darius didn't hesitate. He had seen this too many times before, the silent humiliation, the way people's pride made them shrink into themselves. Without a word, he rang everything up, covering the difference himself. "Nah, don't worry about it," he said, sliding the bag toward the man with an easy smile. "We all need a little extra sometimes." For the first time since he walked in, the man looked up, his expression unreadable. There was something in his eyes, shock, maybe even a little suspicion, like he wasn't used to kindness coming with no strings attached. After a beat, his shoulders sagged, and he let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. "Thank you," he murmured, voice rough, like it had been a long time since he'd had to say those words. You have no idea what this means." Darius just nodded. "Take care, all right?" The man clutched the bag close to his chest, as if it held something far more valuable than just groceries, and disappeared out the door into the cold night. Darius didn't think about it much after that. It wasn't the first time he had helped someone out, and it wouldn't be the last. To him, it was simple. If you could make someone's day a little easier, why wouldn't you? But what Darius didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that the man he had just helped wasn't just another struggling customer. He was Nathaniel Carter, the billionaire CEO of Carter Retail Group, one of the largest grocery chains in the country. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel found himself shaken not by the weight of his fortune, not by the pressure of board meetings and profit margins, but by a simple act of kindness from a cashier who had no idea who he was. Nathaniel Carter sat in his car across the street from Brooklyn Market, the brown paper bag still resting on the passenger seat beside him. His fingers idly traced the rough edges of the receipt as he stared through the windshield, his mind replaying the moment at the counter. The warmth in the cashier's voice, the way he hadn't hesitated, hadn't looked at him with pity or condescension, just pure, uncalculated kindness. It wasn't something Nathaniel was used to. For most of his life, people treated him according to what he was worth, not as a person, but as a number. They saw him as a billionaire, a power broker, a name that dictated salaries and stock values. Even when he had started from nothing, back when he was just another kid bagging groceries in a store much like this one, he had known that kindness was often a currency people used to get something in return. But this man Darius had given without expecting anything back. It unsettled him. Nathaniel exhaled, his breath fogging against the glass as he finally put the car in drive. He hadn't planned on coming here in disguise, hadn't even planned on testing his own company's stores like some undercover boss. But he had felt it, growing steadily over the past few years, the slow, creeping disconnect between himself and the business he had built from the ground up. His board of directors talked about profits. His regional managers talked about efficiency. But who was talking about the people? The further his company expanded, the less he recognized it. Employees were numbers on spreadsheets, labor costs to be optimized. There were whisper store workers who struggled with long hours and stagnant wages. Reports of staff feeling like they were barely scraping by while his executives cashed in bonuses. He had heard it all before, in boardrooms filled with men in tailored suits, but none of it had felt real. Not until tonight. The bell above the store door had chimed like a dozen others he'd walked through in his youth. The shelves had smelled like dust and cardboard and cheap disinfectant. And then there was Darius, standing behind the counter, living inside the reality of the business Nathaniel had spent years controlling from a distance. Nathaniel hadn't even intended to buy anything. He had simply wanted to look to see if he could find what had been lost. And then he had come up short. He had felt the shame curl in his gut. The same way it had when he was 19 and broke, the way it had when he had been a young man wondering if anyone in the world actually gave a damn. And Darius, this stranger who had no idea who he was, had simply smiled and let him keep his dignity. Nathaniel clenched his jaw and shifted in his seat, eyes flicking up to the market's glowing sign. The place wasn't even one of his company's chains. It was a family-owned store, not subject to the cost-cutting policies his managers swore were necessary. And yet, the man behind the counter had done more to uphold the values Nathaniel had once built his empire on than half the executives sitting in his corporate office. He let out a slow breath. He had to know more. Nathaniel reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a leather-bound notebook. Inside, his meticulous handwriting filled the pages with notes from previous store visit statistics, observations, anonymous complaints. But now, for the first time in years, he wrote something different. He wrote a name. Darius Thompson. And beneath it, just one question. How many more like him have we forgotten? The next evening, Nathaniel Carter returned to Brooklyn Market. This time, he wasn't just passing through. He wasn't there to test a theory or to confirm some corporate report. He was there because something about this place, about Darius, wouldn't leave his mind. He had spent years running a company built on the backs of men like this Cashier, men who worked late hours for wages that barely kept up with rent, men who gave more of themselves to their jobs than the company ever gave back. And now, standing in front of the same dull glass doors, Nathaniel wondered how many of them had ever been seen. He stepped inside, the bell overhead chiming softly. The store smelled like it had the night before, like spilled coffee, old linoleum, and the faint scent of detergent. A few customers moved between the narrow aisles, their carts rattling against the tiled floor. But Nathaniel's eyes immediately found Darius, standing behind the counter, scanning items with that same easy, attentive presence. Nathaniel wandered through the aisles, pretending to browse, watching without being obvious. Darius greeted every customer, some by name, some with nothing more than a warm smile. He cracked a joke with an elderly man fumbling for his wallet, walked from behind the counter to help a mother with 2 restless kids, and when a teenager came in looking nervous and out of place, Nathaniel watched Darius subtly slip a small bag of chips into his order without ringing it up. The kid's shoulders relaxed as he mumbled a thank you, as if that small act had kept him from losing whatever dignity he had left. Nathaniel clenched his jaw. This man did more for his customers in a 5-minute window than some of his own store managers did in a week. Then, something caught his attention. A man in a cheap suit, the kind corporate middle management wore when they wanted to seem important, stepped into the store. He was short, with slicked-back blonde hair and the smug kind of confidence that only came from believing you were above the people around you. Nathaniel recognized the type instantly. He had hired men like this. The man walked straight to the counter, cutting ahead of the line like he owned the place. Darius, ever patient, finished ringing up a woman's groceries before acknowledging him. "Evening, Mr. Lively," Darius said, his voice steady, polite. Nathaniel tensed. So, this was the store's manager. Lively barely spared him a glance. "Thompson," he said, voice clipped. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and tossed it onto the counter. "Payroll's locked. No raises this quarter." Nathaniel watched as Darius's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the counter, just for a fraction of a second, before he exhaled and nodded. "Understood," he said simply. Lively smirked. "Didn't think you'd push back. Smart. Some of your kind don't know when to quit." Nathaniel felt his entire body go still. For a moment, Darius didn't react. He just stood there, absorbing the insult, before lifting his gaze, locking eyes with the man who held the power over his paycheck. And then, in that same steady voice, he said, "Is there anything else you need, sir?" Lively scoffed, stepping back. "Nah. Just wanted to deliver the news personally. Thought it'd be better than another rejection email." Nathaniel's hands curled into fists at his sides as Lively turned and strutted out the door, like he had just done the world a favor. Darius let out a slow breath and carefully, almost methodically, folded the paper and tucked it under the register. Then he went right back to work, ringing up the next customer as if nothing had happened. But Nathaniel had seen it. He had seen the way Darius swallowed his frustration, how he bore that quiet, crushing weight of being dismissed. He had seen the way his jaw tightened just slightly, how his posture stiffened for half a second before slipping back into the kind of ease that could only come from years of learning to let things roll off his back. And Nathaniel knew that feeling. He knew what it was like to be told you didn't deserve more. Something burned in Nathaniel's chest, something sharp and unfamiliar, disgust. Not just at Lively, but at himself. He had built this company from the ground up. He had fought for it, sacrificed for it, told himself that every decision he made was for the greater good. But when had he stopped looking at the people who actually made it run? When had he let men like Lively become the face of his stores? Nathaniel turned toward the exit, his mind already racing, his decision already made. This had to change, and it had to start now. Nathaniel didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Lively's words echoing in his head. "Some of your kind don't know when to quit." The casualness of it, the way he had tossed it out like it was nothing, like it wasn't laced with centuries of weight, like it wasn't meant to remind a man exactly where he stood. Nathaniel had been young when he first learned what that kind of power felt like, the kind that didn't come from money, but from the ability to make someone feel small. He had spent years clawing his way out of a world where men like Lively could dictate his worth with a smirk. And yet, here he was, owning a company where men like that still thrived. By morning, he had made his decision. He wasn't just going to fix this. He was going to burn it down and build something better. By noon, Nathaniel was in his office, staring down a conference table full of executives who looked at him the way men look at storms they don't know are coming. "I want payroll reports from every store in the region," he said, his voice calm, clipped. "Turnover rates. Employee complaints. I want to see who's been denied raises in the last 3 years and who made those decisions." A beat of silence. Then someone cleared their throat. "Sir, if this is about—" Nathaniel looked up. Just one look, and the man shut his mouth. "I wasn't finished," Nathaniel said coolly. "I also want a full review of our regional management. If I find so much as one policy that prioritizes profits over people, I will start firing from the top down." He watched the discomfort settle in the room like a thick fog. Some of them had gotten comfortable in their positions, used to the idea that Nathaniel Carter had become just another billionaire who didn't care about the cracks in his empire. They had forgotten who built this. Nathaniel let them sit in their unease for a moment longer before pushing back from the table. "You have 24 hours, he said, turning toward the door. "Don't waste them." He didn't wait for a response. He had more important things to do. By evening he was standing outside Brooklyn Market again, watching Darius through the window. The man was still working, still smiling, still carrying the weight of something Nathaniel had the power to change. But tonight he wasn't just another customer. Tonight, Nathaniel Carter was here as the man who signed the checks. And he was about to make things right. Nathaniel stepped inside Brooklyn Market, the familiar chime of the doorbell cutting through the low murmur of customers moving between aisles. The store smelled the same, clean, a little stale, a mix of cheap coffee and the citrus-scented disinfectant they used on the floors. But tonight, the air felt heavier, charged with something unsaid. Maybe it was just him. Maybe it was the weight of the decision he was about to make, the collision of two versions of himself, the man who had once fought for his place in this world, and the man who had forgotten what that fight was for. Darius stood behind the counter, scanning items with the same quiet focus Nathaniel had seen before. There was no hesitation in his movements, no trace of the frustration from last night, but Nathaniel knew better. He had spent years perfecting that same mask, the kind that let you swallow injustice without choking on it. Nathaniel approached the register just as the last customer in line stepped away. Darius looked up, his expression shifting slightly, not surprise this time, but recognition. He remembered Nathaniel. "Back again?" Darius asked, his voice steady, unreadable. Nathaniel nodded. "Yeah. Figured I should pay for my groceries this time." Something flickered across Darius's face, amusement, maybe, or curiosity, but he didn't ask the question Nathaniel knew was hanging between them. Instead, he just gestured to the counter. "Got something to check out?" Nathaniel exhaled, rolling his shoulders back. "Not exactly. I'm here about something else." He pulled a business card from his coat pocket and set it on the counter between them. The embossed letters caught the dull overhead light. Darius glanced down and froze. His eyes moved slowly over the name, his brows pulling together as if his brain was trying to make sense of what he was seeing. When he finally looked up again, his expression had shifted, completely guarded now, sharper, like a man realizing he had been playing a game without knowing the rules. Nathaniel didn't give him time to speak. "I should have introduced myself properly that first night," he said, his voice calm, deliberate. "Nathaniel Carter, CEO of Carter Retail Group." Darius didn't react at first. Didn't move, didn't blink, just looked at him, searching, assessing. Then, slowly, he leaned back slightly, exhaling a quiet laugh, not amusement, something closer to disbelief. "Well," Darius said finally, his voice low, "guess that explains a lot." Nathaniel studied him, watching the way his hands settled on the counter, the way his shoulders squared just slightly. He had seen that stance before, not submission, not defiance, but readiness. The way a man braces for impact. "I heard what happened last night," Nathaniel said evenly. "With Lively." Darius's jaw flexed. "You hear a lot for someone who doesn't work here." Nathaniel nodded. "I make it a habit." He let the silence sit for a beat, then leaned forward slightly. "You deserved that raise." Darius's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "That's so." "That's so." Nathaniel held his gaze. "And not just you. Every employee in this company that's been underpaid, overlooked, written off by managers like Lively. That's changing starting today." Darius didn't speak, didn't move, but Nathaniel could feel the air shift between them. A tension, a weight, something fragile and unspoken stretching between two men who had both been on the wrong side of power. Nathaniel pulled another paper from his coat pocket and slid it across the counter. "This is an official offer," he said, watching as Darius hesitated before picking it up. "A corporate position. Community outreach and employee development. It comes with a salary that actually reflects the work you do. Benefits. And a budget." Darius's fingers curled around the edge of the paper. A budget for what? Nathaniel's lips quirked at the corner. "For whatever you need to get that cafe of yours off the ground." That time, Darius did react. Just a flicker, a sharp inhale, a split-second hesitation, but it was enough. Nathaniel had read the signs before, had seen what it looked like when a man had taught himself not to hope too quickly. Darius set the paper down carefully. "Why me?" Nathaniel exhaled. "Because you remind me of the kind of man I used to be, and the kind of man I should have been fighting for all along." Silence stretched between them. Not tense, not hostile, just heavy. Darius studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. It wasn't acceptance yet, but it wasn't rejection either, and for now, that was enough. Nathaniel straightened, pulling his coat tighter around him. Think it over, he said, nodding toward the paper. Let me know by the end of the week. Darius didn't pick it back up, didn't move to shake his hand. But as Nathaniel turned to leave, he heard his voice low, steady, unreadable. I didn't do it for a reward, you know. Nathaniel paused, glancing over his shoulder. I know, he said. That's why you're the right man for the job. And with that he walked out the door, the bell chiming softly behind him, leaving Brooklyn Market a different man than the one who had walked in. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.